The Founding Fathers. American patriots of the 13 colonies fought against British rule, resulting in American independence. For more than a decade before the outbreak of the American Revolution in 1775, tensions had been building between colonists and the British authorities. And from the colonies rose a diverse band of military leaders, rebels, politicians, and writers who played key roles in forming a new nation and, after the war was over, hammering out the framework for the young democracy. Without them, there would be no United States of America. These founding fathers, a group of predominantly wealthy plantation owners and businessmen, united 13 disparate colonies, fought for independence from Britain, and penned a series of influential governing documents that steer the country to this day. All the founding fathers, including the first 4 U.S. presidents, at one point considered themselves British subjects. But they revolted against the restrictive rule of King George III, outlining their grievances in the Declaration of Independence, a powerful, albeit incomplete, call for freedom and equality, and won a stunning military victory over what was then the world's preeminent superpower. It all began with the French and Indian War, also called the 7 Years' War, which lasted from 1756 to 1763. While the conflict brought new territories under the power of the British Crown, it was expensive and led to new and unpopular taxes. Attempts by the British government to raise revenue by taxing the colonies, notably the Stamp Act of 1765, the Townshend Acts of 1767, and the Tea Act of 1773, met with heated protests from many colonists who resented their lack of representation in Britain's Parliament and demanded the same rights as other British subjects. Colonial resistance led to violence in 1770 when the British soldiers opened fire on a mob of colonists, killing 5 men in what was known as the Boston Massacre. After 1773, when a band of Bostonians altered their appearance to hide their identities, boarded British ships, and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor during the Boston Tea Party, an outraged British Parliament passed a series of measures known as the Intolerable or Coercive Acts. Those were designed to reassert imperial authority in Massachusetts. In response, a group of colonial delegates, including George Washington of Virginia, John and Samuel Adams of Massachusetts, Patrick Henry of Virginia, and John Jay of New York, met in Philadelphia in September 1774 to give voice to their grievances against the British Crown. This First Continental Congress did not go so far as to demand independence from Britain, but it denounced taxation without representation, as well as the maintenance of the British Army in the colonies without their consent. It issued a declaration of the rights due every citizen, including life, liberty, ownership of property, free assembly, and trial by jury. The Continental Congress voted to meet again in May of 1775 to consider further action, but by that time violence had already broken out. On the night of 18 April 1775, hundreds of British troops marched from Boston to nearby Concord, Massachusetts, in order to seize an arms cache. Paul Revere and other riders sounded the alarm, and colonial militiamen began mobilizing to intercept the Redcoats. On 19 April, local militiamen clashed with British soldiers in the battles of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts, marking the shot heard around the world that signified the start of the Revolutionary War. And this is the American Minute. It is 5 August 2022. You can call me Lieutenant R.K. Kincaid. This excerpt was from an article entitled The Founding Fathers, from a special, unique edition of the History Channel entitled Founding Fathers, How They Shaped a Nation. I've been doing a great deal of thinking about this group of odd men, which are so vilified today because of their race. By that time, by the way, there weren't many other races in the colonies. We knew what was going on as far as slavery was definitely present, and its practice and that institution is the reason why the Declaration is referred to as a powerful, historic, though imperfect and incomplete document, and that refers back to the fact that there was slavery. Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Constitution, actually, one of the original drafts, wanted to denounce slavery, but he had to keep unity among the delegates from the 13 colonies. And he had to make a concession or a compromise with our state and our state delegates from South Carolina, or else they would not have been signatories to the Constitution. So he had to leave out the criticism, specifically naming the criticism of the slave institution of slavery, which was at that time the backbone of the Southern economy. But who were these men? The best as I can recollect it based on my reading is these were a very unique breed of men, very difficult to find in the modern day. They had a very unique, potent, powerful blend of personal virtue, character, great intellect, wisdom, an enviable education, college education. These were well-learned men of letters. These men were true statesmen. They were intellectuals. They were of strong religious belief. Most of them were Christians. There were some that were deists, but however you slice it, every man in that room had a moral compass that derived either strictly or loosely from Judeo-Christian texts, the Holy Bible or the Torah. But there is no arguing the fact that the moral guide behind the supreme law of the land harkens back to a strong underpinning and foundation of Judeo-Christian doctrine, belief, and way of life. Some were strict fundamentalists, and others were just referred to and respected reverently the scriptures, but did not necessarily profess an ardent, fiery belief. But either one of them, however you want to consider it, this body of men had a very common moral compass, and they wrote that into the United States Constitution. So don't let anybody in the left-wing media or mainstream media today try to convince you otherwise. So I wanted to, the title of this segment or episode of American Minute, I was considering a number of different options, but I think it's most aptly summed up in the title, Beautiful Words. And I'm going to be doing further episodes on. I'm going to be addressing and covering the founding fathers, who they were, how they were motivated, how learned they were. If I had to make a bumper sticker today, I would more or less troll that. That's that one that says "my daughter" or "proud parent of a honor student." Okay, every third car seems to refer to their incredibly intellectual, uh, highly achieved scholar, the honor student. I would argue that one founding father was wiser, smarter, and a more eminent scholar than an entire school of today's honor students. The more reading I do, the more convinced I am of that position. And so I'm going to take up we get into reading some beautiful words that should be recognizable to most true patriots worth their salt. I'm going to take some critical words and excerpts from the Constitution, Declaration of Independence. I'm going to go over some of the founding fathers, especially those from South Carolina. We should all know who they are. I have to confess, I did not. I knew a couple of the last names, but I could not correctly name all four off the top of my hand. So I'm going to dive into this. And the first segment I'm going to read is the preamble of the Constitution, and these, I'm sure all of you have heard this before, but I think certain things are worth mentioning over and over and over because they're so valuable, so powerful, so foundational, and so true. So it goes like this: "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." I remember having to learn that in elementary school. And so we'll talk a little bit about briefly what the Constitution is to put this in context. The United States Constitution is a fundamental framework of America's system of government. It creates a government that puts the power in the hands of the people. It separates the powers of government into three branches: the legislative branch, which makes the laws; the executive branch, which executes the laws; and the judicial branch, which interprets the laws. It sets up a system of checks and balances that ensures no one branch has too much power. It divides power between the states and the federal government. It describes the purposes and duties of the government. It defines the scope and limit, especially the limit, of government power. It prescribes the system for electing representatives. It establishes the process for the document's ratification and amendment. It outlines many rights and freedoms of the people. Another document we're going to be addressing today is the Declaration of Independence. And a lot of people kind of conflate or confuse or take words from either the Constitution or take words or phrases from the Constitution and insert them into the Declaration and vice versa. So I'm going to say a few things about that differentiate the Constitution from the Declaration of Independence. Though connected in spirit, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are separate, distinct documents. The Declaration of Independence was written in 1776. It was a list of grievances against the King of England intended to justify separation from British rule. The Constitution was written and signed in 1787. It was a charter of government that came to be ratified by the states and continues to be the supreme law of the land. Both documents have played an important role in American history and the spread of democratic ideals around the world. They were both signed at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, steps from where the National Constitution Center now stands. When and where was the Constitution written and signed? The Constitution was written and signed in Philadelphia in the Assembly Room of the Pennsylvania State House, now known as Independence Hall. This was the same place the Declaration of Independence was signed. The Constitution was written during the Philadelphia Convention, known now as the Constitutional Convention, which convened from May the 25th to September 17th, 1787. It was signed on September the 17th, 1787. Another question, where is the Constitution? Is it at the National Constitution Center? The National Constitution Center owns a rare original copy of the first public printing of the Constitution. This printing was published in a newspaper, the Pennsylvania Packet and Daily Advertiser, on September the 19th, 1787, just 2 days after the Constitution was signed. The Constitutional Convention was conducted under an oath of secrecy, so this printing represents the first time that Americans, known as we the people, saw the Constitution. The original signed handwritten Constitution now resides at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. So when did the Constitution actually go into effect? The Constitution did not go into effect the moment it was signed by the delegates. It needed to be approved by the people through the ratification process. Article 7 of the Constitution establishes the process for ratification by simply stating that, quote, the ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states, so ratifying the same, unquote. On June 21, 1788, New Hampshire became the 9th state to ratify, and the Confederation Congress established March 4, 1789, as the date to begin operating a new government under the Constitution. So the key date and answer to this question, when did the Constitution go into effect? That answer is March the 4th, 1789. Who wrote the Constitution? Because many of James Madison's ideas find their way into the Constitution, he is also often referred to as the father of the Constitution. Indeed, he was the driving force of the convention through the summer of 1787, and his notes of the deliberations have provided valuable insights into those proceedings. However, the Constitution was the result of months of passionate, thoughtful deliberation among the delegates. Many others besides James Madison made important contributions, particularly those who served on the Committee of Detail. That committee included Oliver Ellsworth, Nathaniel Gorham, Edmund Randolph, John Rutledge, and James Wilson, and those on the Committee of Style, which included Alexander Hamilton, William Johnson, Rufus King, and Gouverneur Morris. Other notable delegates included Benjamin Franklin and George Washington, who served as president of the convention. Why was the Constitution written? In 1787, Congress authorized delegates to gather in Philadelphia and recommend changes to the existing charter of government for the 13 states, the Articles of Confederation, which many Americans believe had created a weak, ineffective central government. From the start of the convention, however, it became clear that the delegates were forming an entirely new form of government. The preamble of this history-changing document makes it clear why it was written. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So why is the Constitution so important? In the Constitution, the Essential User's Guide, the Honorable Sandra Day O'Connor, former Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, put it in this way. She remarks, "What makes the Constitution worthy of our commitment? First and foremost, the answer is our freedom. It is quite simply the most powerful vision of freedom ever expressed." I'll repeat this for emphasis. She states, "It is quite simply the most powerful vision of freedom ever expressed." Let that sink in. She continues, "It's also the world's shortest and oldest national constitution, neither so rigid as to be stifling, nor so malleable as to be devoid of meaning." Boy, that is put so adroitly and so eloquently. It is really peerless in the way she makes her statement. "Our Constitution has been an inspiration that changed the trajectory of world history for the perpetual benefit of mankind." I'll say that again. "Our Constitution has been an inspiration that changed the trajectory of world history for the perpetual benefit of mankind." In 1787, no country in the world had ever allowed its citizens to select their own form of government, much less to select a democratic government. What was revolutionary when it was written, and what continues to inspire the world today, is that the Constitution put no governance in the hands of the people. We've all heard of Constitution Day. It's been a while since I've heard it from the media, but we have a Constitution Day. So what is it? Constitution Day is a federal observance that commemorates the U.S. Constitution. It is observed on 17 September. So mark your calendars. September 17th is your Constitution Day, because that's the day the Constitution was signed in 1787, September 17th, 1787. Constitution Day was established by law in the year 2004, so relatively recently. In addition to creating Constitution Day on the day that had formerly been known as Citizenship Day, the act requires that any educational institution that receives federal funds holds an educational program on the Constitution of that day, September 17th. So despite how far left and whacked out our public schools are, which are federal, unless I missed the memo, unless they have struck down that law, they are required to hold an educational program focusing only on the Constitution. Now, whether they still do that or not, I don't know. I certainly hope they do. So, if you want to learn more about the Constitution, you're in the right place. And that place is the National Constitution Center, where the Constitution is celebrated, debated, and illuminated. And that's the source from what I've been reading for this American Minute so far. So transitioning from that fantastic commentary on our Constitution from the National Constitution Center, I encourage everyone to go visit it online. I'm going to shift gears to the Declaration of Independence. And I'm going to read an excerpt on the Declaration of Independence from the National Archives. On July 4, 1776, the United States officially declared their independence from the British Empire with the adoption of the Declaration of Independence by the Second Constitutional Congress. 2 days early, the Lee Resolution passed the Second Constitutional Congress, resolving that the 13 colonies, were, quote, free and independent states, unquote, separating from the British Empire to create the United States of America. The Committee of Five, consisting of John Adams Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston have been working on the Declaration since June the 11th, with Jefferson as the main drafter. Some key take-home points from this subject. The Declaration of Independence was a formal declaration by Congress that the United States was an independent nation. Jefferson looked to the English Declaration of Rights from 1689 and also Virginia's Declaration of Rights, authored by George Mason, as primary influences. Interesting tidbit. The compromise to unite the Declaration provided a list of grievances against King George III. One of Jefferson's drafts attacked the slave trade, but as I mentioned earlier, it was removed by the Georgia and South Carolina delegates to Congress. The power of preamble, unalienable rights, the people themselves as ultimate authority. The Declaration changed American freedom, but it also was a global document. It justified freedom based upon natural rights. Jefferson initially included among the grievances on addressing the slave trade, King George III has, quote, waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him. He's referring to the enslaved here. Captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold. He has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain this execrable commerce. And that is quite a denunciation from Thomas Jefferson. And that was what he originally intended to be in the Constitution. The question of slavery, as you know, was dealt with and addressed in the Bloody Civil War, in which 750,000 primarily white men slaughtered themselves to address the question of slavery. It's too bad now that the left continues to throw this in our face and foment racial animus in this country as a key political strategy to promote division among the races, skipping right over all of the indescribable suffering, destruction, and death, maiming, disease that took the lives of 750,000 Americans. And that is the new number based on modern scholarship of the Civil War. Think about that. 750,000 dead, killed in action. That's not talking about dying later from disease. That's not talking about all of the lives were ruined from having limbs amputated or destroyed. And then also the PTSD, which wasn't really diagnosed or given a name until a century later. I'll read this denunciation again by Jefferson that I think we all wish it was included, but understandably, given the nature and the conditions of the time in Georgia and South Carolina, I can kind of understand why they would have some misapprobations about it, but I'll read it again. Quote, King George III has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, he has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain this execrable commerce. So we're coming now almost to the end. I want to focus on South Carolina and those 4 men from South Carolina that were delegates to the Second Constitutional Convention. So who were they? Those men from South Carolina were Thomas Hayward Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., Arthur Middleton, and I think there's a fourth here. Sure, there's a fourth. I'm sorry, folks. Bear with me as I flip through here. Well, apparently there were three. I'm sorry. I thought there were four. There was only three. Thomas Hayward Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., and Arthur Middleton. Thomas Hayward Jr., who lived from 1746 to 1809, was a planter and a lawyer and was one of the three signers from South Carolina captured and imprisoned by the British. He signed the Articles of Confederation while a member of the Continental Congress. He returned to South Carolina and became a judge and a member of the state legislature. The British destroyed Hayward's home at Whitehall during the war, and he was held prisoner until 1781. After the war, he served 2 terms in the state legislature from 1782 to 1784. Thomas Hayward became the first president of the Agricultural Society of South Carolina. So he definitely paid a price, as many other signers of the Declaration of Independence did, in fact. So he was held prisoner by the British. Thomas Lynch Jr. Thomas Lynch Jr. lived from 1749 to 1779. Not very long. Thomas Lynch Jr. was an aristocratic planter who was the youngest signer of the Declaration to die at the age of 30. He was trained as a lawyer and graduated from Cambridge University in England and was elected to the Second Constitutional Congress to carry on the duties of his ill father. Thomas Lynch Sr. and Thomas Lynch Jr. were the only father and son team to serve concurrently in the Continental Congress. Thomas Lynch Jr. and his wife were en route to France in the year of 1779 when their ship was lost at sea. Arthur Middleton. Arthur Middleton lived from 1742 to 1787. Arthur Middleton was chosen to replace his more conservative father in the Continental Congress in 1776, but he failed to attend most of the sessions. He was captured by the British and was held captive for over a year in St. Augustine, Florida. During the time of his incarceration, the British destroyed most of his property. After his release in 1781, Middleton returned to politics, and that's all I have on Arthur Middleton. So we're still focusing on the Declaration of Independence, and again, I return to my title, Beautiful Words, because these are words that should reside in our hearts and minds as patriots and should be readily recalled and immediately recognizable when we hear them. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and, accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And that is the opening 4 paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. What follows is a specific itemized listing of, I think, 27 grievances. I could be wrong. But I wanted to get to the closing paragraph of the Declaration of Independence for our elucidation and our familiarization. So here it is. After the last itemized grievance, this is what follows. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that, as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Powerful words. I don't know about you, but every time I read it, I'm inspired. It's a refreshment to my mind, heart, and soul. Whenever I hear these words, makes me appreciate who these men were, the gravity of the cause for their assembly, their wrestling and debating for those 4 hot months in 1776. The debates, the reasonable debates among very wise, learned men. Oh, to be a fly on the wall in that room. So, before I conclude this segment of the American Minute that I've entitled Beautiful Words, I'm going to just sort of close things out with some very beautiful words by a man in another era, not ours, not those of the founding, but somewhere in the middle, about 85 years later, when our country was in that bloody Civil War. A man named Abraham Lincoln wrote a rather short speech To everyone's surprise. And at the time it was written, it received very mixed reviews, mostly negative, due to its brevity, and most people and most of the media and reporters at the time that took down his words didn't think the speech would have much import or much longevity. In other words, they thought that President Lincoln's words to commemorate the cemetery in November from the Battle of Gettysburg that was fought in the first 3 days of July, so this is months later. Most of the people in attendance thought that the words would be relegated to the dustbin of history, but as we all know now, the Gettysburg Address is one of the most enshrined, beloved, and recognizable speech of any in our history. We've all heard it. You're about to hear it again, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I. The Gettysburg Address. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that this nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this, but in a larger sense we cannot dedicate, nor cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Thank you, everyone that was listening. I'm sorry if it was a little long, but that concludes the American Minute. These beautiful words from American history. I'm Lieutenant Kincaid. Have a great day or night. Our country is in need of good patriots to preserve and defend freedom and liberty for our nation and those we hold dear. One Republic Society is a national patriot organization formed around a militia. ORS patriots are involved in many different grassroots and community actions across our country while maintaining our purpose as a militia. Join the fight to restore our constitutional republic. Go check out our website and contact us for more information. Our staff will be happy to answer any questions or concerns. ORS operates out of pocket and by donation. Inflation is high and the economy is shaky, but with your support we can keep fighting by whatever means necessary. Help support our cause by donating today. When it comes to our freedom and liberty, every little bit counts. If you're looking for some great Christian Patriot content, please check out our affiliate, the Patriot's Armor. They will help you put on the full armor of God, keep it, and maintain it so together we may stand against the tyranny of evil men. Also in these unprecedented times, a little patriotic metal artwork for your home, office, man cave, or she shed can boost morale. Check out PD Plasma. That's PEED Plasma. They got what you're looking for, or they will definitely make it. If you enjoy our content, please hit the subscribe button, like, and share. All links are also listed in the description. Remember, be brave enough to defend it in a world that's afraid to keep it. We are in one republic society. We shall preserve freedom and defend liberty at all costs.